Imagine a king on horseback, sword drawn, thundering across a muddy battlefield in the heart of Europe, leading his troops against a formidable French army. Bullets whistle past, cannons roar, and yet he presses forward, rallying his men with raw courage. This is no medieval legend or romantic tale from centuries past. This was King George II of Great Britain in 1743 at the Battle of Dettingen, the last time a British monarch would ever personally command soldiers in combat. In an age when kings were increasingly figureheads, confined to palaces and parliaments, George II stood apart, a warrior monarch, a devoted husband, a flawed father, and the steward of an empire on the cusp of global dominance. His 33-year reign from 1727 to 1760 bridged the old world of absolute rulers and the emerging constitutional monarchy, witnessing Britain's rise amid wars, rebellions, and cultural triumphs. But who was this man behind the crown? A German prince thrust onto the British throne, beloved by some, mocked by others, yet undeniably pivotal in shaping the nation we know today. This is the story of George II, a tale of family feuds, battlefield glory, political intrigue, and an enduring legacy that echoes through history. Our story begins not in the grand halls of London, but in the princely courts of Hanover, a German electorate in the Holy Roman Empire. On November 10, 1683, October 30th by the old Julian calendar, George Augustus was born in Herrenhausen Palace to George Louis, the future Elector of Hanover, and Sophia Dorothea of Celli. From the start, young George's life was shadowed by tragedy and tension. His parents' marriage was one of convenience, arranged for political and territorial gain. His father, cold and ambitious, soon took mistresses, while his mother sought solace elsewhere. The scandal erupted when Sophia Dorothea fell in love with a Swedish count, Philip Christoph von Königsmark, who mysteriously disappeared, widely believed to have been murdered on his father's orders. Sophia Dorothea was divorced, imprisoned in a remote castle for the rest of her life, and George never saw her again after age 10. This early betrayal scarred him deeply, fostering a lifelong hatred for his father and a wariness of emotional vulnerability. Raised in Hanover, George grew into a spirited, military-minded young man. He spoke French as his first language, German fluently, and later mastered English and Italian. Educated in the arts of war, he fought bravely in the War of the Spanish Succession, serving under the Duke of Marlborough at the Battle of Oudenarde in 1708, where he was wounded. Yet domestic peace eluded him. His relationship with his father deteriorated into open hostility. As Prince of Wales after his father's accession as George I in 1714, George became a focal point for opposition politicians in Britain, establishing a rival court at Leicester House. Father and son clashed bitterly over politics, with George I even arresting his son briefly and excluding him from public ceremonies. When George I died suddenly in 1727, while visiting Hanover, the 43-year-old prince ascended as George II without attending the funeral, a decision that, surprisingly, won him praise in England for seeming to prioritize his new kingdom over old family ties. George II's coronation on October 11, 1727, at Westminster Abbey was a spectacle of pomp and music. The composer George Friedrich Handel, whom George had known from Hanover, created the majestic anthem Zadok the Priest, which has been performed at every British coronation since, a stirring tradition born of this Hanoverian king. But George's early reign was marked by continuity rather than change. He initially considered dismissing his father's chief minister, Sir Robert Walpole, the architect of Whig dominance, and often called Britain's first prime minister. Yet, persuaded by his wise and influential wife, Queen Caroline of Ansbach, George retained Walpole. Caroline, whom he married in 1705 after visiting her incognito and falling instantly in love, became his closest confidant. Described as intelligent, witty, and politically astute, she often acted as regent during George's frequent trips to Hanover and moderated his temper. Their marriage was remarkably devoted for the era. George famously declared on her deathbed in 1737, when she urged him to remarry, "No, I shall have mistresses," a candid admission that underscored his loyalty to her memory. Walpole's era brought relative peace and prosperity. He masterminded financial stability after the South Sea bubble crash, promoted trade, and avoided major wars, allowing Britain to recover and grow. George, though fond of Hanover and spending 12 summers there, showed genuine affection for his adopted country. He founded the University of Göttingen in 1737, a beacon of Enlightenment learning, and issued charters for institutions like King's College, now Columbia University, in New York in 1754. The American colony of Georgia was named in his honor in 1732. Yet, George's personality was complex. Brave and disciplined, with a soldier's routine, he rose early, loved hunting, and despised poets and painters, poets and painters. He was also hot-tempered, frugal to the point of stinginess, and prone to outbursts. Anecdotes abound. He once quipped about a mad general, "Mad, is he? Then I hope he will bite some of my other generals." His lack of self-confidence led him to rely heavily on ministers, but he possessed sound judgment in foreign affairs. Family life, however, mirrored the fractures of his youth. George and Caroline had 9 children, but relations soured, especially with their eldest son, Frederick, Prince of Wales. History repeated itself. Just as George had opposed his father, Frederick became a center for anti-Walpole factions, quarreling bitterly with his parents. In a dramatic episode in 1737, Frederick spirited his laboring wife away from court to deny the king and queen attendance at their granddaughter's birth. George banished him from court, echoing his own past exclusion. Tragically, Frederick died in 1751 from a lung injury, possibly from a cricket ball, leaving George's grandson, the future George III, as heir. George lamented later in life, reflecting on his distant parenting. "I know I did not love my children when they were young, but now I love them as well as most fathers." Daughters like Anne, Princess Royal, and Louisa fared better, with Louisa becoming Queen of Denmark. The peace of Walpole's time shattered in the late 1730s. Public clamor for war against Spain over trade disputes, the infamous War of Jenkins's Ear, sparked by a severed ear, forced Walpole's resignation in 1742 after over 2 decades in power. George turned to favorites like John Carteret, drawing Britain into the broader War of the Austrian Succession in 1740–1748. This conflict, triggered by the death of Emperor Charles VI and Prussia's invasion of Silesia, pitted Britain and Austria against France, Spain, and Prussia. George's personal stake was high, protecting Hanover from French aggression. The war's defining moment for George came in 1743. Leading the Pragmatic Army, a coalition of British, Hanoverian, and Austrian forces, he found himself trapped near Dettingen on the Main River by a superior French army under the Duc de Noailles. Short on supplies and retreat cut off, George refused to flee, declaring he came not to be a poltroon. Mounting his horse, he charged at the head of his troops, sword in hand, becoming the last British king to fight in battle. Amid chaos, his horse bolted, forcing him to fight on foot. The Allies turned the tide. French commander the Duc de Gramont rashly attacked prematurely, and disciplined British infantry held firm. Victory at Dettingen boosted George's popularity at home. Handel composed the triumphant Dettingen Te Deum. Yet critics accused him of prioritizing Hanover over British interests. The war dragged on, merging into domestic peril, the Jacobite Rising of 1745. Exiled Stuarts, claiming the throne through James II, saw opportunity in Britain's continental commitments. Charles Edward Stuart, the Young Pretender, or Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed in Scotland with minimal support, hoping to rally Highland clans against the Hanoverians. Initial successes stunned the nation. Jacobites captured Edinburgh, defeated government forces at Prestonpans, and proclaimed James VIII king. Charles marched south, reaching Derby in December 1745, just 130 miles from London, sparking panic. Bells tolled, banks closed, and George prepared defenses. But the invasion faltered. Promised English and French support never materialized. Clans hesitated, and commanders advised retreat. Charles withdrew north, winning at Falkirk, but facing inevitable defeat. In April 1746, at Culloden Moor, the Duke of Cumberland, George's son William, crushed the Jacobites in a brutal one-sided battle. Highland charges shattered against disciplined volleys and bayonets. The aftermath was harsh. Clans suppressed, tartans banned, Gaelic culture targeted, in a bid to end Jacobitism forever. Charles escaped romantically across the Highlands, aided by loyalists like Flora MacDonald, fleeing to France. The 45, as it was called, extinguished the Stuart threat, solidifying Hanoverian rule. The national anthem, God Save the King, gained popularity among loyalists during this crisis. Peace returned with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, celebrated by Handel's music for the royal fireworks, a grand outdoor suite for winds and percussion, premiered in Green Park amid fireworks, though the display famously malfunctioned. Yet respite was brief. The 7 Years' War, 1756–1763, erupted, a global clash pitting Britain and Prussia against France and allies. George, aging and grieving Caroline's loss, played a lesser role, deferring to William Pitt the Elder, whose genius orchestrated victories. British triumphs expanded the empire. Robert Clive's conquests in India, Plassey, 1757, James Wolfe's capture of Quebec, 1759. Though George died before the war's end, his reign laid foundations for Britain's imperial ascendancy. By 1760, George was 76, blind in one eye, hard of hearing, yet active. On the morning of October 25th, at Kensington Palace, he rose early as usual, drank hot chocolate, and retired to his closet stool. A valet heard a crash. The king had suffered a ruptured aortic aneurysm, collapsing dead on the floor. It was an undignified end for a warrior king, but fittingly private. His grandson, George III, succeeded peacefully, ushering a new era. George II's legacy? He stabilized the Hanoverian dynasty, extinguishing Jacobite flames and embedding constitutional monarchy. Under him, Britain prospered economically. Coal, shipbuilding, agriculture boomed, laying industrial roots. Culturally, Handel's patronage flourished. Politically, ministerial power grew. Flawed, temperamental, Hanover-focused, he was brave, devoted, and pivotal. In an age of enlightenment and empire, George II was the bridge, the last king to fight, the guardian of a throne that would endure. His story reminds us that history's great shifts often hinge on one man's courage, one family's fractures, and one nation's resilience. From battlefield charges to fireside laments, George II embodied the drama of his time, a monarch who, in the end, secured Britain's future while charging boldly into its past.